Well, hello, folks. Welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host, and today I bring you an episode with Dr. Stephen Aizenstat. I would like to read his bio, give you a little updates on the podcast and housekeeping, and then just get started. So first, his bio. Stephen Aizenstat is the founder and Chancellor Emeritus of Pacifica Graduate Institute, Dream Tending, and the Academy of Imagination. For more than 35 years, he's explored the power of dreams through depth psychology and has devoted his life to understanding the profound wisdom and healing power that exists within each of us, and has helped thousands of students, individuals, businesses, and organizations through the techniques revealed in the Imagination Matrix. His work centers on the insight that through our dreams and imagination, we can access limitless creativity, innovation, improved relationships, and ultimately our human potential. He's collaborated with Joseph Campbell, Marion Woodman, Robert Johnson, James Hillman, and Native elders worldwide. He's conducted dream work and imagination seminars throughout the U.S., Europe, and Asia. His website is dreamtending.com. Check him out. It was a fantastic conversation. We talked about his book, The Imagination Matrix, How to Access the Greatest Power You Have for Creativity, Connection, and Purpose. It was a fantastic overview and engaging way to help us engage our inner world, the imagination. And he's got tons of stories. I mean, one of the things he led out with is saying he's a storyteller. So you'll see in a minute. He's very nice to get to know. And I have to thank a mentor of mine, Jill Scott Reagan, for introducing me. And Jill has been an avid dream tender for years. She's been going to his retreats. And I've been hearing about this for over a decade. So it was a real gift to be able to connect with Dr. Aizenstat. And I am excited to bring you the episode. So on other notes, check out the Center, our sponsor, the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences, a boutique integrative wellness center that my wife and I started a long time ago. We are doing some really radical changes. We've got a great team of clinicians, a few Jungian analysts, a few therapists, a few acupuncturists, and growing in really wonderful ways. So I'll be releasing a number of innovations that we're engaging into that community. Also, check out the Jung Center at junghouston.org, junghouston.org. The center, by the way, is the Center for HAS.com. Also, check out The Sacred Speaks, thesacredspeaks.com. There's all kinds of stuff on the website. I've started a TikTok project. I know that sounds wild, but kind of all the different social media avenues give an opportunity to engage folks in a different way. So TikTok is kind of a behind-the-scenes daily. I'm posting daily, so it's kind of a radical discipline. Instagram is a bit more information and clips from the episode. And of course, YouTube, I'll be releasing both the episode and the shorts pretty soon. Thank you to Esalen. That was a fantastic experience. Rodney Waters and I went out to Esalen, taught our class on ecstatic experience, music, and Jung's Red Book. It was wonderful. It's always great to be at Esalen. Thank you. And also the upcoming episode with Dr. Becca Tarnas at Pacifica University. We talked about her dissertation on Tolkien and Jung and their respective Red Books. So stay tuned for that, out in about 2 weeks. And other than that, check out the website, check out the center. Please follow and share and enjoy this episode. Stephen is such a good intermediary between we and the kind of mushy, undefinable world of the inner imaginal landscape. Thanks for being here, and for now, we'll leave it there. Stephen, thank you for this time. I obviously have an incredible insider knowledge because I've read the book, The Imagination Matrix, How to Access the Greatest Power You Have for Creativity, Connection, and Purpose. And I've finished it and come up with a bunch of questions that, in my experience, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then we're not going to get to any of the rest of the questions because that's just the way it works.
Yeah, okay. And I tell stories. Is that going to be okay if I share some stories?
Man, please. I'm going to ask you to share some. So you're that's good.
Okay.
You're a
All
step
right.
ahead of me. So
Okay.
welcome to The Sacred Speaks. And I wonder if you could just set up the viewer and the listener on this book, and then we'll just dive into a number of questions that I've got. So just tee us up.
All right. Well, it's been A while coming. I've been working with people and with dreams for decades now. And as I've been working with dreams, I've noticed over time that dreams come with so much. They offer us guidance. They will
Mm,
talk about what we're missing in life. They offer an abundance of expression and point us towards our sense of purpose. And two, there's something more, and thus the imagination matrix, because they do offer portals. If we bring our curious mind into relationship with the dream, they'll offer portals into the realms of deep imagination. And that was the inspiration that really mused the formulation of this book that I wanted to share with folks far and wide.
Well, you did it wonderfully. I mean, just to note, the book has practices and opportunities to. I guess that brings us to the first question, which is we are in such a materialist, consensus, externally oriented world, and we're trained in that world. And I got a sense that you're writing this book to begin to really help people start to navigate some of the mushiness of the inner world. So, could you please talk about how you have helped people begin to go inside, whatever that means?
Hmm. Yeah, and I was just in a workshop this morning that I was offering, working with corporate executives actually. And I work with people from school age children
Mm-hmm.
in the elementary grades through the university, of course, and then into adult life. And this morning it had to do with opening curiosity. And I think that is the way in. We live in a world that is so commodified, firstly, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It's just that we become programmed, and we
Mm-hmm.
spend so much time in front of the screen and then the busy mind takes over and the rational mind takes precedence. And again, nothing wrong. We need all those facilities. It's just that we begin to distance from something that is essential, something more authentic. Our sense of, well, really all the way goes towards our calling, our life's purpose, which gets lost somewhere in that journey. And the book really orients around the access to the resources of deep imagination. And it starts with curiosity. Curiosity. And curiosity, of course, opens when we're very little, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. The child's mind that's naturally curious, the natural mind. Then we go into school, then the machines come in. Now the devices start happening when we're literally 1 or 2 years old. They're babysitters now, used that way.
Yeah.
And curiosity takes on a different formulation, right? And in fact, it almost gets replaced by, outside programming or scripts of one sort or the next. So the intent now is to reawaken curiosity. That's the beginning place. That's everything. The first chapter of the book is devoted to curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
awakening curiosity. And from there, portals become available, and we have the capacity and the ability to then experience what it's like to be inside of an imaginal mind, inside of our innate inheritance, which is imagination from the beginning, actually.
It reminds me of a story. You said storytelling earlier. It reminds me of a story. A friend of mine was sharing. She grew up in the 70s, and her father came home one day and left about 3 tabs of LSD on the dresser. And at 4 years old, she just gobbled them up. And
Oh,
not, I don't advocate for this or recommend this to
yeah.
anybody,
Yeah.
but her mom took her to the doctor, and her mom, of course, was freaking out. And the doctor said, "Look, we'll watch her vitals, but quite frankly, kids are in this place all the time, and so it's not really that big of a deal for her." It makes
Isn't
me
that
think of childhood.
Well, that's right. There is something about the child's mind,
Mm-hmm.
not childishness. See, that's how it gets dismissed and marginalized, but the innate spontaneity of the child's mind. And we know that. I mean, actually, I remember when our daughter was younger, much younger, and she was in a room, and all these conversations were going on, and that we heard sounds coming from the bedroom, the door was shut. We were certain, my wife and I, certain that she had friends over, right? We were even making a meal for her, our daughter, and her friends. We knocked on the door, and who's there? Our daughter and friends for sure,
Yeah.
but not literal friends, her imaginal friends. And she was interacting and engaging and sparking and really, really involved with her imagination, which is
Yeah.
the intent of this book, to really re-engage in an animated world, in an
Mm-hmm.
imaginal landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not imaginal in the sense that it is less than the material world. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
just the contrary. It enhances, it opens us to the imagination of other people and the creatures and the things that we participate with in the world. Yeah.
Well, you talk about innate genius in the book, and you keep drawing these lines between imagination and creativity and curiosity and innate genius to personal film fulfillment and well-being for both self and others. Would you draw that line? But in particular, I'd like for you to define genius in the way that you do, and maybe we can. That's a good defining moment.
Okay. Well, yeah, and I think how you laid that out was really, right on for me at least. And that is with curiosity, right? Something comes forward. And we know that now. All the research, now there's meta studies of research that when we're
Mm-hmm.
in curiosity, something else happens. Actually the mind brain system shifts. We go from essentially alpha to theta. We go to theta state, which then creates a different way of being present. Creativity opens, innovation opens, our sensitivity to ourselves, to others increases. And what happens in my direct experience is something begins to present itself. And what presents itself is something that I've named innate genius. Now, what I'm suggesting is all of us, all of us have the capacity to connect with our innate genius. And of course, in the world of today, we attribute genius to very special people, and they are extraordinary people that come into the world, whether they be incredible musicians or scientists or artists. You know, we have a sense and we can attribute genius to those folks for sure. That's easy to do. To make connection to our personal innate genius, which is ever present and available to every person. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's something else again. And there is, you mentioned story. The story does come to mind. Um, let me share this one. A couple are coming to mind now. These are
Please.
people I've actually worked with. So, um, there's this fellow that this happened about a year ago or so. And, I'm offering workshops here and there now all over the world. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just about to go to China, believe it or not, to do a big piece there. And a fellow comes in, he's doing fine, right? And he's a contractor. And, he's spent his life in that work and provides for his family, worked hard to get to where he was and is, and everything was going well. But something brought him to this workshop. It's not something he would ordinarily do,
Mm-hmm.
but something wasn't feeling right. He was just starting to feel down, and each day was getting more routine. He was feeling the burden of the ordinary workload and the too muchness of that. His light was dimming, and he knew it. And he was getting comments now from his family that, hey, you're just not yourself anymore. And, when that happens, that leads to kind of out of sorts at the beginning. A little bit of depression starts coming in, and
Mm-hmm.
rest of the story. So he comes to this workshop. And that's usually, people will come if they're feeling either inspired by something on one hand and or hurting in a particular way. He was hurting. And he came in and he said, look, I'm here because, I was encouraged. Some people recommended, and I'm just feeling out of sorts. And I was listening to him and I was saying, let me offer you an idea. He goes, yeah, I'm open. Actually, I'm open to most anything at the moment. All right, here's an idea. Let's awaken curiosity. He says, well, okay, well, that's something I can do. I know curiosity. Well, let's really bring emphasis and underscore. So I suggested for the next 5 days, why don't you do this? Allow yourself to be outside, open your vision. We're very focused more
Mm-hmm.
often than not in our vision, open to peripheral vision. I even use my fingers, narrow vision, focused vision, peripheral vision, wider vision, metaphor of owl, big eyes,
Mm-hmm.
able to see a bigger picture. So very simple exercise, but very inviting. I said, go into the world place and take some breath, really deepen. Give yourself 15 minutes. So that's doable, right? 15 minutes. And walk about, walk on the street, walk on a trail in a naturescape. Just take some time away from family and work and with peripheral vision and see what
Mm-hmm.
happens. And just take notes of what you hear and or see or smell. Okay, so we use our senses, smell, touch, taste, listening, and make some field notes. Really simple. And let's do that for 5 days. There's no end, there's no goal. We're just going to continue in that activity. So, oh, sure, I can do that. That's okay. Actually, that's good because I need more breaks. That's what he said. I'll just need to take some more breaks, and this is perfect. So he does that. 5 days later, he comes back. We have another conversation. It was pretty interesting. And he brings his journal. He took a bunch of little notes, not a journal per se, but he took his notebook that he was using and he shared with me. And I said, look, this, and this, and this. So that's fantastic. Let's do this. Let's take another 5 days. We can go back there again. Open. Now you have a sense of what this is like and take additional notes, field notes. Does that, comes back 5 days later. Whoa, okay. Dr. Aizenstat, Steve, there's something that's happening. There is something that is happening. I do want to share that with you. I say, well, go on. That's my favorite. The two favorite questions I have when I'm with people: go on and how so. Open-ended questions.
Mm-hmm.
Not what does this mean or how did this work? Just go on. How so? And yeah, yeah. And he said, well, I don't know. My breath was deepening, and I'm starting to really listen to sounds like birds singing, and I heard the wind in the trees. And it was like really something. And I saw glints of light on things. He's just really in his imaginative place. His curiosity was awakening, right? He was
Mm-hmm.
now, again, as we should talk about, in that childlike experience, childlike, that mind filled with interest. I said, okay, here's one last thing I'm going to offer you. All those little notes that you've scribbled over the last, the field notes over the last couple of weeks. What I'm going to invite you into is, hey, take them and just start to let them find each other. We're going to make a mosaic of these notes. Just allow them to, one after the next, intersect with one another. And he did. And he said, and then sketch them. I mean, not make a painting, just sketch them into a design, into a pattern, which he did. And then the most curious thing happened. I saw him one last time and he said, whoa, okay, I have to tell you something. Uh, Something's going on inside that's really extraordinary. I'm just looking at things differently, right? My perspective is changing. And I went to work and yes, I can do this. I'm doing it successfully. I'm working well with the employees, but you know what? I just touched into what's really true for me. I'm burning out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing well, but I don't really, it's not fulfilling. It was. I mean, I'm not going to abandon ship. I'm not going to hurt the employees. I'm going to provide for my family, but I'm really not feeling very fulfilled. And it's affecting everything. I mean, my kids are noticing it. My wife is noticing. Even I'm getting comments from, people that are working for me and colleagues. And then I had an idea. I said, well, go on. How so? He said, well, I remembered another time in my life when I really did feel fulfilled. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, I believe it or not, I'm remembering being in middle school. Like I think it was eighth grade. And I was taking a wood shop, class in wood making, wood shop. And I just remember when I was in that space, how incredibly fulfilled I felt,
Mm-hmm.
artistic. Oh my gosh, I felt such an abundance of really a certain kind of passion that returned. Okay. Time passed. I said, that's extraordinary. That's fantastic. Maybe you can include even little bits of that more so in your awake life, like couple projects. And he said, yeah, that's just what I'm going to do. And actually, it's what he did. He started creating some projects in his garage, came home a little earlier, right? Started a little later. And he started, okay, 6 months later, I see him again. What happened is he shifted really fully. And what he did is he went from being the owner of the company, the foreman, he still owns the company, but he passed that on to a manager. And now he's become a finished carpenter.
Mm.
He's really found his passion, his interest, a finished carpenter, and the stuff that he's making is extraordinary. And, I attribute that not to something extraordinary, but he did reconnect with his innate genius, his genius that allowed him to really find the love that's moving through him, the care, the creativity, perhaps is even a better word, the love of his creativity that's moving through him. And now his work is really prized, honestly, in Santa Barbara. He's very highly regarded for the the carpentry that he creates for people.
Beautiful. Yeah. So a question. I'm a clinician, and I'm wondering in these scenarios how you deal with resistance when you suggest to somebody to go take a look and go spend even 5, 15 minutes. How do you deal with that when you have somebody that's like, look, I didn't have the time. I just didn't do it. I don't care. I don't want to. What do you say?
Yeah, I say very simple. Oh, you don't care. I don't have time to do that. And I'll respond, oh, how so? Right? What's that like? Not to care, not to make the what does that open inside of you? Not to make the time and to stay outside of that. We go, okay.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And as soon as I say that, as soon as I see that, okay, what's awakening is curiosity. Now I'm really curious about that, right? So
Yeah. Well
you kind
played,
of
man. I like that.
psychic aikido, right? As a clinician, it's psychic aikido. You enter the dance. You don't
Yeah.
prescribe more to dos. That's the opposite because that's going to meet with the resistance. No, you just get curious of what is, right?
Well done. Well, so with that in mind, we're talking about these. You note this because almost you have to note it. That your imagination matrix it does serve as a medium for problem solving and incubating new solutions. You talk often about the ways in which you've worked with some of these people in tech, people in industry. So would you speak a little bit about that for folks who do have a resistance around this weird imaginal stuff, but noting how it does manifest, as you've just said? Maybe some more stories come to mind.
Yes. Well, there is another story actually that does come to mind. This one I think I did write in the book. Um, she was extraordinary. She a family, husband and two small children, younger
Mm-hmm.
children, and she was working as a nurse in a hospital. Very effective. It's hard. It's hard to be a parent of young kids and do anything really.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a beautiful parent, and she and her husband worked out ways that they could find enough time for themselves to feel fulfilled. It's work. It's a challenge for sure. That and two, he was year 4, year 5 at the hospital, and it was a wonderful hospital. And she was really starting to get drained as well. The task, the everydayness of it. And she was noticing something, though. She was noticing that um, I offered her the same possibilities. Notice what is happening in your life that sparks curiosity. And I know you have to be, by definition, task oriented, and you need to be in the discipline of what it is to
Mm-hmm.
be a nurse. You do. In addition, just keep an open mind, right? Keep your curiosity alive and pick up hints as you're in your day to day and see what comes forward. And what she noticed, right, was that there was music, and she loved
Mm.
me, and she did. And what she would do is she would hum. That's how she self comfort, humming. And even when she was with patients, I mean, she had to stay in her discipline, of course, and not to make anybody uncomfortable, of course. But she would hum to herself. It was incredible. And I said, well, that's curious. Say more about that. Well, I've always loved music and I've always loved to sing. Actually, she said, when I was in high school, I was part of the high school choir, the choral. She just would sing. She loved it, loved it. And I said, notice what's awakening. Yeah, I know. But,
Mm.
then I got called into nursing and I like that too. I love it. But I just seem like, and with the children, I just kind of given up all my musical capacity. I don't make time for music. I said, well, yeah. Well, why don't we continue to notice? All right, I'm going to make this one. It's a long story. Sessions go by. She comes back, Steve, um, I'm not going to give up nursing because I like nursing and it's important for our family right now to do that. But there is something else that's happened. I've noticed that when I'm walking in the hospital, that there are places that we could bring music. I said, well, say more. How can you imagine that? Well, I just know that when I'm humming to myself, it's really comforting. And I know that now when I was with patients, I tried this. I started just humming something softly, not obnoxiously and always with permission. And they were comforted. All right, check this out. A year later, I revisit with her. And what happened truly is that she shared this with some of the hospital administration and they thought, well, that's really interesting. She now is a nurse in the hospital. She is. And she has now orchestrated, to use a wonderful metaphor, orchestrated a program in the hospital where she brings in music for people that are in particular levels of distress and need. Can you believe that? She brought,
Such a good arena, music
oh, it
therapy.
is.
Oh,
Oh, it's beautiful.
so good.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to back up because a couple of the things that I'm personally interested in your work is, of course, in the depth psychological arena. You know, your beginnings at Pacifica University, hanging out and being influenced by James Hillman, Bly, Robert Johnson, Jung, Joseph Campbell. So I'm interested about your framework of depth psychology and how it informs your work, because in particular, I really want to get at this. Um, you go so elegantly into active imagination and discussing inner figures, and I noticed that a lot of folks really struggle around even putting form to inner figures. So could you talk about kind of your formation in depth psychology and also this world of the inner figures? You note, of course, the wisdom, the peace, the guardian, the protector, the wise person. So talk a little bit about the inner figures and your history.
Oh, okay. Well, that's my lifeblood, right? Um, that's perhaps my calling. And I
Yeah.
have been privileged to work with um, extraordinary elders.
Mm-hmm.
These are elders in the field that have devoted their life and their time and energy to cultivating the ground of the orientation of the depth psychological calling. I would want to mention Marion Woodman in there as
Mm.
well. Yeah. And all of those folks I met personally. I had the great honor of collegially working with each of them
Mm.
and being with them outside of Jung. Although with Jung, he's been profoundly instrumental in so many ways,
Mm.
as well as elders in, First Nation peoples and in indigenous cultures. It's in there's something about the inner life of
Mm-hmm.
psyche that is populated with these inner figures, right? And what happens when Hillman, I mean, we've always had this idea of guided imagination or active imagination, and it kind of got construed as guided imagery almost, that we
Mm-hmm.
can use our imagination to evoke figures. That's a guided imagination. And we know how helpful that's been in so many ways, from working with in cancer treatment of A, B, and C and D, to use active imagination to develop, kind of companions that will support us. The difference is, and I think it's misconstrued, when Carl Jung, was talking about active imagination, he really wasn't talking about us doing something. It's not an activity that we would do. Rather, active imagination refers to the imagination itself being active. The imagination with an autonomy of its own in its activity. That's how Jung
Mm-hmm.
really was thinking about and conceptualizing active imagination. It got shifted in when we operationalized, or when, we started to build curriculum around the Jungian approach for the most part. Of course, I have the privilege of working with some extraordinary analysts that have really taken it into other spaces altogether. Hillman comes along, right, and suggests, hey, in addition, let's experience the psyche, her, him, their selves as the many figures of psychic life, right? The many entities, like in the dream time. In the dream time, we sometimes will see ourselves as a figure in the dream, right? That happens, 80% of the time for people that are dreaming, um, remembering dreams. We all dream, but those that we remember. But when we see ourselves in the dream, the question then becomes, who's dreaming the dream? You know? And the idea here is that the psyche as alive with an autonomy of its own, the psyche itself is dreaming the dream. The figures in the dream are dreaming the dream along with us in the landscape, in the motif of the dream. So if that's the case, then how do we deepen our relationship with these various figures that I name soul companions? That we deepen our relationship with these figures of dream, and what do they have to share with us? Right? Very different approach than what does this mean? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What does this have to do with me? Mm-hmm. That's different. It gives way to different questions. Who's visiting now? Who's visiting now?
Mm-hmm.
What's happening here? So now we're into a different landscape altogether. We are bringing ourselves into the living, autonomous landscape of psyche, right? Of imagination, of an animated, illuminated imagination, where we can participate and become partnered with. We can deepen relationships with these various images, even the nightmarish, which is really what's up at the moment, because all of us are part of the circumstances of the world today. And,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm working with young people and people in their, later stages in life, I mean, it's agitation, crippling anxiety, depression, isolating depression, isolation. Those are symptoms that are more and more prevalent. So, how do we move from there into a different way of being present inside of self, inside of ourself? Well, one possibility is to really deepen relationship with the many selves that are always in imagination. Immediately that evokes curiosity. When we're in curiosity, we're not going to be anxious. We're not going to be depressed. Curiosity, anxiety, and depression, they don't live together. The reciprocal inhibitors. That's the great news, right? If we're authentically curious, if we are really inside imagination, deepening our relationship with imagination, even as I suggest in the book, journeying along with these figures in the realms and through the realms of deep imagination.
Mm-hmm.
If we're there, something happens. We're not anxious. We're not depressed. We're not. We have our support figures. We have those figures that are guides for us. We deepen relationships with the varieties of these different entities, these psychic beings. And they can be figures that look like people. They can be animals, they can be landscapes, they can be emotions, right? But when we are with these different elements, these different entities, then we're part of an inner community. I can tell you, for me, it is what changes a life to be involved with an inner community of soul companions, the name that I offer, soul companions. To be part of that community, not only do we feel supported, but there is a sense of belonging, deep belonging. Mm-hmm. So we do need our external communities, yes, of course, now more than ever, to be with others, like-minded others that are, have a care for us as we do for them, and for whatever advocacy that we're involved with. So crucial. And two, to be connected to an inner community of these soul companions. It's a game changer. It changes a life. If I go, and I do, I'll offer keynote lectures to sometimes thousands of people in the audience, certainly hundreds of people, or in a small leadership group in a corporation. If I go in alone, or if I'm teaching a course, if I'm going alone, I can do that now because I have life experience. I have my lecture. I have my discipline. I can do it. It's just different. If I start the day with first coming inside and aligning with these soul companions,
Mm-hmm.
and then offer the lecture, well, first I come off the page within 5 minutes, right? I did more spontaneous. I'm more
Right.
confident for sure. And I just feel like I'm not there by myself. Yeah, do I have a little performance anxiety when things are big? I do. But that anxiety, in addition, it transmutes, and I describe the process of transmuting the hard places, the anxiety or the fear or the feeling left out or being rejected or all the things, the complexes we call it psychologically. Yes, they are real. They are part of my humanity, my direct experience. Those two can be transmuted, and we can look behind the veil and notice which companion is here now.
Mm.
And to the extent that we can befriend these companions and then sustain relationship, now I have the possibility of being in the world and in my relationship, right? And with kids and in the workplace with colleagues, not alone and not so subject to reactivity. Because when I'm anchored in that way, I'm much more responsive. I'll listen first rather than go quickly and tell or judge or
Mm-hmm.
critique. Yeah, because I have my support system.
Well, you
The
said
support.
you said the word, and I wanted to follow up on that. This idea of illumination and transmutation, and you mentioned it earlier when you talk about inner companions. Of course, there's a real concern that what people inevitably stumble upon would be what many in our tradition call the shadow. So, would you talk about illumination, transmutation in the context of this shadow figure?
Yeah, and I even name that as well, the shadow companions. Now what? I mean, and they're tough, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
named just a few just now, left out, all those kinds of things. Um, I will talk about that. Let me give an example, though. You mentioned Joseph Campbell, right?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I love Joseph Campbell. I like his work. His name, it's funny, his name is coming up again and again with these last number
I
of months.
just taught it. I was at Esalen. I led a workshop at Esalen last week, and I was driving in on the one and uh, listening to Romancing the Grail in his series, and he's just up in my world too. So I love that you're going there. I'm happy to hear it.
All right. Well, then I'm going to tell the bigger story.
Good.
Okay. Well, you brought in Esalen. You got in Esalen. Well, that's where I met Joseph, right? So I
Wow,
met Joseph
cool.
at Esalen. Yeah, it was when I was in my early 20s. He was up there and he was doing his thing. He had just retired from Sarah Lawrence in New York, which was a all women's school then, and he was just coming out into the world, right? Of course, Hero of a Thousand Faces he had written earlier, and that was out, but not popular. Nobody really heard of it, not fully, not yet, not then. But he came down to visit with me, and no, I would visit with him at Esalen, and he would just sit and talk story. He'd tell story. I'll never forget. I mean, during the lunchtime, and at Esalen, and during the dinner time in that area.
Yeah.
And then, I would attend his workshops and listen to him as he did so beautifully talk myth
Mm.
and story. And he'd bring his slides, and that's how it worked back then. He brings a deck of slides and put the slide up, and then he would just go off into stories and, legends and folklore and fairy tale and mythic motifs. It was extraordinary to listen
Beautiful.
to just weave. And he always centered around one idea. And he said, this is all really cool. And what matters most is how it really lives in your life. He
Mm.
always wanted to make it experiential. He said he attributed that to his work at Sarah Lawrence, where his students all demanded that of him. He was a male professor, of course. All these females say, yes, 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 Dr. Campbell, but how does it live in my life? How does it make a difference? So he always had to come up with a relationship between the mythic motif. All right, so let's go forward a little bit. So I'd pick him up in my little VW bug, at the airport. He had two. Oh my goodness, I haven't shared this for so long. He had two suitcases he'd bring with him. Right, one suitcase with clothes, and then another suitcase. And I'd take him to his hotel, help him get settled. It was shocking to me. The one suitcase with the clothes was just one change of clothes. That's it. Very light, nothing. The other suitcase filled with slide decks and books. He's just like amazing what he brought with him. Just amazing. It was really remarkable. And he'd always wear a coat. And the coat, when he was working, was always the same coat. And I thought, well, maybe that's why that other suitcase. Remember, I'm in my 20s. I don't know what's going on. It's all bigger than life at that point. And I thought, well, maybe it's he can't afford another coat. I don't know. Maybe there's something going on that I'm not seeing. And then one day I asked him, in all innocence, I said, Joe, I call him Joe then, but uh, Dr. Campbell, what, uh, uh, I just curious, is there something that I could help you with? Do we need Oh, Steve, no, 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 I wear the same coat because this is what I present to the outside world.
Mm.
I just want to be part of the world. And this persona is what allows me to blend in and be part of everybody else, with everybody else. He said, but look at this. Then he takes this coat and he opens it. Oh my gosh. What's inside is this incredibly beautifully woven tapestry and design of color, similar to what's on your back wall there, but just this
Yeah.
amazing picture. Yeah, just
Wow.
amazing, embroidered in this beautiful, beautiful way. Oh, he said, yes, I wear this on the inside because
Oh.
this reflects, the stories that are moving through me. I keep
Wow.
this close to my heart, right? Close to my heart. Okay, so a couple of years passed. Now we become friends, and
Mm.
we're now colleagues and friends. And then the Bill Moyer series comes out on
Yeah.
public, what you're mentioning. And then we
Mm.
used to have like 16, 18 people in the little Isla Vista. That's the little student community next to the University of California. When that came out, we went downtown to what was called it is still the Arlington Theater. Now there are thousands of people after watching the series that would show up for his lectures and his presentations and all like that. He was very, very generous. He left a lot of the resources so we could actually establish Pacifica Graduate Institute. He was
Yeah.
very, very generous. He was wonderful that way, with me at least, and with us. Um, then here's the story going back to Shadow and the Shadow Companions. He said one day, you know, um, I just received an invitation that I wanted to talk with you about. I'll never forget, we're at the wharf in Santa Barbara having dinner, right? He'd always get the exact same thing, the local sea bass and a little Glenlivet. He loved Glenlivet scotch. So one little shot of Glenlivet shot, scotch, and the local sea bass. And then he said to me, Steve, I just got this invitation, and it's a young fellow. Remember, he's from a different era. He's from decades ago. And he's inviting me up to his place. It's a ranch up north somewhere. And he read Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he's thinking about making a movie. I said, well, uh-huh. Do you remember his name? Yeah, well, it's going to be George Lucas. He said, yeah, that's it. I said, yeah, well, because I went to UCLA and I was in the film school and collaborated with the USC film school and blah, blah, blah. So I knew the name and saw some early work. Yeah, Joe, I think it actually is worth a trip up there. It's a good idea. I support you doing this. Okay, I think I will then. All right, so, in his own right, he's incredibly sophisticated. Joseph Campbell, I'm very astute. Went up, and the next time I saw him, 3 months later, you know, fine young chap, that man. Fine chap. And I think he really gets it. I feel like he really understands it. So I said, yes, go ahead. Well, the rest is history, right?
Yeah.
And then the Star Wars comes out. And of course, now, generations later, many generations, the iteration of that motif has been
Mm.
in all kinds of medium,
Mm-hmm.
right? All kinds of medium, sequels, prequels, for the little ones, for the kids. I mean, it's all over. And George Lucas, always so generous with his,
Mm.
always generous, always acknowledging his influence in the work of Joseph Campbell. The Shadow Companion. Remember episode 1, right?
Mm.
Now we have Luke Skywalker, right? And he's entering into the place of the biggest of the Shadow Companions, all dressed in shadow garb, and that's the Darth Vader character of episode 1, which is now in the middle of the trilogy. Um, and Luke is caught. I mean, he is really threatened. The Empire is threatened. Everything is threatened, you know? And what's he going to do? How is he going to face this shadow figure? And he has to have his soul companions, right? You can't do it alone. We need protection. We need support, right? We need capacity. We need something more than a rational mind or a particular weapon. That's not going to work. So, the story goes, he's blessed with the companion of Obi-Wan,
Mm-hmm.
his teacher, Yoda, with capacity, a different way of making approach. He has the support and protection. He lets go, deepens into imagination, and deepens into his, essential resource. He's now in his flow, right, with what was named the force, with
Mm-hmm.
the depth of capability for each of us, our flow, our sense of life force, that anchor, that way of being present. And what happens with a shadow companion? The one that's most menacing and difficult and threatening. Mm-hmm. He's wearing the mask, the veil is lifted, and who does he discover? Right? He discovers the figure behind that horrible, threatening entity. And he discovers Father, right? And
Mm-hmm.
with vulnerability, that one. When the mask is off, that shadow figure becomes extraordinarily vulnerable. And you know, ultimately very helpful and important, an ally, really, for Luke, a necessary relationship to allow the next evolution of the journey. And for each of us, that's what I feel passionate about this, as you can tell, right? Each of us, we just carry that, I guess, because I've been a therapist for so many years, clinical and psychology and marriage family therapy and high school and junior high school counseling.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we struggle with. It's what people come to see us about, right? It's where we are in pain and hurt, that place, the place where we're tight and constricted. And it is from these very elemental things that I was mentioning, the critic or the judge that we feel, or growing up in a critical family system, or feeling judged, or just not good enough, or feeling the rejection that I was talking about, or the bigger one, failure, which is horrible, and then our whole life gets orchestrated by us being in reaction to those psychological complexes. Well, it's possible to personify them. So it's not just a feeling that we're caught by that's inside. And then we get identified in that feeling. Then we'll do everything we can figure out to organize our lives to avoid that. You can imagine the drain energetically that
Mm-hmm.
that takes. And then we lose contact with our destiny, our true calling. We're now just trying to survive with good reason, right? And then when there's put in some early trauma, that then just amplifies the whole game. So how do you work with that, right? Well, we have to transmute those figures. It's a process, transmutation, process of working through the shadow figures and I don't want to idealize or romanticize this, because I just been working with myself personally and with people for too long to know that it's not just an easy fix kind of thing. But there
Mm-hmm.
is a process where we can really bring ourselves to those figures in a different way. Again, the support and protection, these soul companions I talked about, we need to have them by our side, as well as people in our outside community that are supportive and caring. And then we come into contact. We allow them to personify, to come into form. So right there, we disidentify. Instead of them being, I'm identified with the figure, I am my rejection, right? I am the victim of feeling criticized. I am that figure, right? We put it outside, we personify, bring it out in front. So immediately there's distance. Now we have the capacity to deepen a relationship, and I give lots of skills to do that. How to have a dialogue. And as we do, something different happens, just as what happened with Darth Vader figure. We begin to see that one often in its vulnerability. Truly, that's the surprise that happens, right? The one that was so menacing and difficult, underneath the veil, because of their pain, usually in their early suffering, underneath that veil, there is a vulnerability that comes forward. And truly, those figures can become some of our most important allied figures. And now people have written books about that, the
Yeah.
romancing the shadow. And there's just a whole
Sure.
numbers of books where we can transmute that one into allies. They then, and I'll just pause here, they then become incredible soul companions along with the others when we journey next into the deeper realms of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, to have those along with us it's the difference that makes all the difference. They just have capacities. And in awake life too. Now, rather than, getting caught in situations where we're always meeting those same figures because we haven't done that work. And so then we ultimately, get into a relationship with those figures. Sometimes we marry those figures. It's like, oh, So we create distance. In fact, with those figures as soul companions, we're not so vulnerable to people like that. We see that coming, and that's not what I'm interested in. So I know that's a longer
No, I have
response.
so many questions. I mean, of course, you bring up a question of a living myth. I can't, but so I want to go there, but I also want to go to your book, and I know we only have about 11 minutes. So the question that I would ask you, I want to talk about your quadrant, which I think is important to get into. The question I would ask you, though, also, maybe you can kind of merge these two together, is something Nietzsche notes about a living myth, the death of God, for example. And here we're talking about Campbell and not having a living mythology, how disruptive that can be. And so you've posited four quadrants as a way of differentiating kind of these various dynamics where we have opportunities to engage with the creative imagination. So could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe you get over to living myth, but I certainly want to talk about your four quadrants.
I'm going to take a deep breath in.
Yeah, go, man.
There we go. Here we go. Yeah. Well, for me, I got real interested in exploring these realms of imagination, which I named the imagination matrix, right? The web of imagination, the tapestry of imagination, like Joseph Campbell's coat, the
Beautiful,
tapestry.
beautiful.
And what I noticed in this tapestry is that there are quadrants. Now, they're not, I don't want to literalize, but just for our discussion, different quadrants, because the imagination is made up of many, many, many things. But certainly part of it is the regenerative energies of Earth, of nature. I was just with another group this morning, actually, really early on, and they were way into talking about the regenerative, restorative capacities that Earth offers us. Of course, to the extent that we separate from that, we have a hard time,
Yeah,
which is a whole other conversation.
totally.
And then the other quadrant is what we just talked about, the imagining psyche, right? The mind, but not just the rational mind, the curious mind, and what that brings with it, the many images and figures of imagination. That's the place of story and mythology. That place. The third quadrant is machine, but it's the new technologies. But we're part of a world. We've always been part of a world where there has been machine from the very beginning, and now it's evolved into A, B, C, and D, and the waves are still reaching the shore. By the time we're finished, there'll be another technological.
Yeah.
So, but we have to bring that into account because that's part of our lives, right? And it's part of it. And from a psychological and physiological, because the imagination matrix is, as you said, applied. So I work with illness and disease, and there's ways of working with illness and disease in complementary ways to traditional and important healthcare providers. But functionality of our body is a machine. How does that work? How does functionality work? How does technology inform our life? How does that quadrant interact in imagination? How do we keep imagination in an increasingly technological world, particularly our humanity in a world of screen oriented? And then the fourth quadrant is, of course, the transcendent, right? Whatever we call it, the universal. Some people name spiritual, but that which is transcendent. And that really becomes important when we're working in complementary medicine, working with imagination. It's a belief in, hey, there is something in addition to that I can place belief in relation to, moving on a healthier path, just that. But something that is transcendent, the cosmos, looking at the night sky and noticing the stars. So the confluence between those quadrants, because they're interrelated and they intersect, and those places of intersection where they interrelate, I mentioned it earlier when I said the mosaic, the patterns, and you can open portals and go through. So that's what I talk about and outline. I do for myself in the morning in imagination. I remember how those dynamics interplay. And then what I would like to do is make it very applied, very practical. How do we experience the intersections of when those four qualities come together? And when we experience those intersections, what opens up? What's the access point into the realms and to journey in and through imagination? Hmm.
It was early when I was working on my dissertation. I was really interested in 4 levels of interpretation of ancient texts, and I, I then wanted to look at the ways in which we could interpret reality. And so I loved the way you brought these ideas in. In particular, something that I think is really important in 6 minutes is machine. You brought machine into it, and everybody, there's such a reactivity around this idea of ways that technologies is harmful, but I wish people would talk more in the way that you are about these extensions of consciousness that really help expand our capacities to show up in the world in healthy ways. So you gave a public service announcement in your book, which is a valuable one. And I heard you say earlier you've worked with high school and kids, and I have too. I've been a counselor in those contexts. So could you give a PSA as we're closing on parents for their children who are consumed with screens and how we can navigate through that?
Yeah, yeah, okay. I'd be delighted to. Yeah,
Yeah.
that, like you, for me, that's service. That is exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just attended about what now 4 months ago the Unified School District sponsored
Mm.
for parents scared to death. They losing their kids
Yeah.
to the screen. They really are frightened, and they had parents sitting around different tables sharing their stories. Oh my God, it was heartbreaking. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, and frightening. They're frightened. So the question becomes, all right, look, this is an actuality of our world. We're not going to get rid of technology. That's silly to think that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to figure out a way to navigate, to co-create along with, to keep our humanity, keep relationship in family life, right? So I give a number of examples, but we have to figure that one out. We do. And I'll just name one of many, but one is, look, you know, well, let me start there. If you, and I know we have 4 minutes now, ask somebody, hey, what brings you here? Which is like you, the traditional question, one way or the next, that will invite people into conversation when we're working as a counselor, a good friend, a therapist. What brings you here? You know, and if you ask a 12-year-old or 14-year-old that question, they look at you, huh? And you ask anybody else, and that, well, oh, what brings me here is I feel rejected by such and such. You talk about, huh? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It took me a while to figure out where that haze was coming from. They don't know which you're talking about. What brought me here?
Hmm.
What do you mean, me? I mean, I have 3 cyber identities, 2 avatars that are awake and at work 24/7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I'm gaming, I got, it's like there's a lot of selves,
A
right?
lot of
And
me's. Yeah.
yeah, there are many. So the question is, all right, that's an actuality. And in family life, how do we then include those figures into the conversation at the dinner table? And very simply, and this may be way too simple because of our limited time, but I suggest to parents, look, there are things that are going on in your life that are interesting and that have, you're making discoveries around what's going on for you in technology. Have a conversation. You need to bring the others that are in the home anyway. They're there. They're all there. So let's bring them out from behind the screen and out from the closed door of the bedroom and into conversation. And the way I suggest to start is, look, you start by sharing your direct experience and invite your kids to share their experience. Hey, here's what's going on for me and who I found really fascinating. Fascinating is a good word. Curiosity, a good word. Who are you finding really interesting, fascinating? And let them share their
Mm-hmm.
story about who they're engaged with on screen when the door is closed. Because
Yeah.
then you're bringing those figures that are technologized into conversation. They become embodied, essentially, imaginally, and we're then in relationship rather than completely split off and separate. So that's one of many ways, but certainly that. Obviously, the other possibilities, you just need to spend more nature time to
Yeah.
couple
Connected.
screen time. There are many ways, but that idea of inviting these others into the family conversation, it seems hard and bizarre and like nobody's can go for that. It is remarkable in my direct experience how available that conversation is between parents and or caregivers and kids.
So you're saying don't say, back in my day, we used to have real friends.
Yeah, yeah.
Look, I know we got to finish, Stephen, but thank you so much for your time. I've loved our time together. It's been years in the make. And thanks for my opportunity to read this book. And people out there, please buy the book. It's coming out very soon. Is it not? When is it coming out?
Yeah, it's just been out a week or two and it
Good.
did really well. Yeah.
Good. Go get the book, Stephen. Thank you.
A privilege and a pleasure. Thank you.
Be well, man.
Control.